Each week at Zoom into Wine, we gather amazing people together all over the country and taste something unique, something different, and try to connect with great specialists to help us learn, help us to appreciate, help us grow. And recently, I had the great pleasure of meeting Chiara Pepe, um, granddaughter of Emidio Pepe, when she was visiting Los Angeles. And I was so in riveted by her conversation that I did everything I could to get a little time with her here today. So I really appreciate it. We're recording this on a Saturday, and it's a great pleasure to introduce you to our audience, and hopefully for years to come, people will be able to watch this video and learn all about the great story at Emidio Pepe. Good morning, Chiara.
Thank you for having me. So good to be here.
Uh, you're in Italy now, and it's just before Christmas, 2024 or 23, and uh, it's almost like a spring day there, I hear.
Way too hot to be Christmas, but here we are. Yeah, almost having lunch on the terrace outside today. So that makes us think a lot about how things are changing. But um, we're welcoming whatever comes and whatever nature has there for us. So we're learning how to cope with that thing coming up, and yeah, we're welcoming for whatever it comes. And yeah, so
Well, I
yeah, how
kind of the topic that was kind of the way you led the conversation when I met you was, I could really hear the internal concern that you had for global warming and some of the battles that you are predicting as a grape grower, as a winemaker, as a winery, a classic wine region. And it's really fascinating to me, a person who has spent his whole life traveling and reading and studying wine and tasting great wines and seeing how, this is the side of the business that's, I don't think many people spend much time thinking about, but obviously you are, and that's fascinating.
I think I think we are in a very beautiful and challenging time for wine now because things are changing, and we have all realized very clearly that it's very difficult to predict any longer. So you cannot rely on a lot of things that traditionally were done. So we are using tradition in a all different way because we are reinventing the way we are interpreting tradition.
Mm.
So we are taking certain knowledge and we are reusing it in a different way. And I think it's like personally an exciting challenge. There's no thing that can really repeat it the way they were and just as they were. So I'm personally not scared. I'm learning. My whole family is learning. My grandfather's still learning. Um, for sure, like I think before, like you could have those years in which a lot of conditions were almost perfect. Um, and you go with the flow and things were just the way they were meant to be. Now things are getting more challenging. So you have very different years one after the other, like opposites. And we've been seeing this in Burgundy, in Champagne, in Italy, you have one very hot, very dry, followed by a very rainy, very complicated to manage, very long ripening season, one after the other. So you got to be very trained to go from one frame to a totally different one. And as human, we are learning how to vinify and how to be in the vineyard and how to stretch and juggle from one season to the other. So our plants are learning how to do the same. So there are a bunch of elements that we are rediscussing, that we are rethinking, and the faster and the smarter we are in doing this, the better we are as winemakers in a massively changing climate. Because also, to me, the way it is changing, it doesn't have a real trend. It's not just temperatures getting higher constantly, but you go from one extreme to the other. So you got to think how to manage and prepare your soils of the whole estate in receiving an incredibly dry year ahead or an incredibly rainy year ahead. You have to be ready for the whole scenarios, and that is more challenging, like to me that it's what excites me the most. It's like, what are the tools I can use and the approaches I can use to be ready to both scenarios.
I have a small little Zinfandel brand that I make here in California, and I have a teeny little vineyard, but can really relate to everything you just said, because the vintages have been wild. From the coldest vintage in the history of California to the warmest vintage in the history of California, from the longest vintage ever with a 23 to vintages with fire, and had it's like it's almost like playing poker, and you don't know what game you're playing until the hand has been dealt.
Big time. Absolutely. So much agreed. And yeah, totally like that.
Well, we are super excited to learn from you and some of the things that you're concerned about, and the journey that you're on, because I think that's what really makes Emidio Pepe and you and your family so timeless, is your look at the wine business, your look at the future, and also the ability to lean on the past, because you have your grandfather, Emidio Pepe, still around and still in good health, and he is sharing his wisdom and his ideas. And that's an amazing asset. How did you prepare for the wine world? Did he send you off to school? Did you study fashion? What direction did you go?
Well, I think he was very smart in kind of preparing the following generation to a very precise, authentic legacy to be transmitted. He didn't want that I go study enology. He let us all be very free to decide whatever we want to do for our education. So he let us all travel and learn while traveling. Um, but what he was very good at is passing on a lot of passion for wine and passion for agriculture. And then it's something that pulls you back.
Hmm.
So yeah, free to go, but with a lot of passion that, brings you back at one point. So
Yeah,
it was very
I see.
um I well, I grew up here on the farm and on the vineyard with the family. I spent a lot of time with grandfather as growing up. So that was incredibly helpful to kind of see him and watch him work when he was still very active in the vineyard and he was in charge. So to me, he never told things. He never said things out loud. He wasn't a teacher at all. But for me, it was very crucial to watch him work, to watch him prune, to watch him walk the vines, and to, watch him put a lid on a tank. And so by observation, there are some instinct or some gesture, some things that I learned when I was very little. And then as I grew up, we started traveling together a little bit, and I studied economics, and then I kind of took over the little bit of traveling that he was doing to spread the gospel in a way, um, till the point in which talking about wine wasn't enough any longer, and I wanted to make wine.
Cool.
And the moment in which I moved to Burgundy and I studied viticulture and winemaking, and I worked for some other estates, and yeah, and combined to the viticulture and winemaking knowledge that I had acquired just by living here at the estate, I came back and then I took over vinification and vine growing at Pepe in 2020.
Hmm.
So I took over from my aunt who was in charge of viticulture and winemaking before me, and she her turn took over from grandfather. So grandfather was, definitely probably a more complicated person to take over from, as my aunt did, and I think doing it women to women, it's a bit more straightforward. It's a bit easier. Also, grandfather is a very, strong figure to work side by side, and as
Sound like you're being very diplomatic.
uh, let's say well, it still is like it is a very precise precise and meticulous person. So things are done his way and only his way. And I think, this approach kind of allowed him to, while in his path of growing, it allowed him to define very well his way of operation and his way of working, which, allowed him to achieve a certain precision, a certain style in his wine. So back in the days, he did something completely different from anybody else. So he had to invent from scratch his own operational method. And he was very courageous in doing that.
Hmm.
And in within his own way of operation, it was a pioneer in many things. Aging, bottle aging, use of concrete, hand destemming, food treading, like many pillars of vinifications that we have today were totally not totally new, but the way that it was still using them in the epoch he started bottling wine were so crazy back in the days. But in fact, he was pioneering. So our responsibility is today, now, facing global warming, facing, things that are changing, it's to keep pioneering. And so we are doing many things a bit strange, and we are doing things that, aren't done before, just because we have to, inherit his attitude as well, which is part of genetic as well. Yeah.
You've when did Emidio Pepe begin? When did your grandfather put his name on the wall?
Grandfather bottled his first wine in 1964. Back then, it was just grandma and granddad doing the whole thing, just the two of them. Operation was very small, 4 hectares. So, teeny operation. Then my aunt and my mom joined the business. My aunt before, so she, took over initially sales and then vinification and vine growing. And then my mom joined, and she joined and took care of administration mainly. So nowadays they both co-own Emidio Pepe, so they are in charge of the estate nowadays. And me and my sister have joined. I've joined in the past few years. Me initially taking care of, export sales, travel, educational part, and in the last part, in the last 4 years, I shifted in the more practical side of winemaking, taking care of the cellar and the vineyard, while my sister is in charge of all the hospitality. We have a farm-to-table restaurant on site with a few rooms, and so she's in charge of all that. And yeah, hopefully, other younger member of the family will join. But yeah, we are a small operation. I have a team of 7 in between vineyard and the cellar, including me. And it's a team that rotates all around vineyard and cellar, so that we are not blocked into one element all year long. So everybody gets to see, and everybody's also trained to do both. Yeah, grandma and granddad is still around, still checking. And it's pretty incredible. It's pretty incredible to have 3 generations working together, having the experience of grandma and granddad, and having, my mom and my aunt who, have a lot of energy. And me and my sister, who have had the opportunity to, travel the world and are able to, come back at the estate. I'm well aware of the responsibility and well aware of the tradition and the heritage that we're taking on, and it's pretty incredible. Yeah.
So these wines that we're going to be tasting today are listed in some of the greatest restaurants in the world. It's certainly at the top of the Italian restaurant wine list, but also in Michelin starred restaurants and some hipper spots here in Los Angeles as well. And
Yeah.
um, um, the wines of Abruzzo aren't usually thought of with the great legend that you guys provide. So it's really fascinating to me how your grandfather was able to put together a brand, a story, and some wines that have basically ascended into the status that they're in. And it'd be an amazing lesson for the wine world to gather. And I think it, from standing where I'm standing, from knowing what I know, which is little, um, it's a story of quality and of a determination, and also being a very forward thinking, stubborn. Uh, you had to be stubborn, not to bend and not to bow, and broke through to a higher level where you have gained the respect of the wine world. And I think that's a path not many brands get to take, and not in it, and those that attempt it don't always make it. um, but that's how I kind of have in my mind settled things. How do you like my interpretation?
Well, you said it all. It was very beautiful. I totally agree. All those elements that you just said played a huge role in exactly in the way grandfather decided to do things. Stubbornness. He strongly believed in his ideas and he never gave up. And he did things differently because they were different from
Can you give us an
what.
example?
Uh, so, grandfather started making wine in 1964. It was an element, a moment in which very pale, crystal clear white wines were very trendy.
Hmm.
Grandfather was making an unfiltered Trebbiano that had a golden color, totally different from what people were expecting.
Mhm.
Totally different.
Mhm.
Another element was oak. 60s, 70s, and 80s Italian wines were trying to be as popular, or, well, yeah, just as popular as French wines. And looking at how they were making wine and how Italian people were making wine, the big differentiating element was oak. So everybody started or wanted to use oak. And all those very oaky wine, because Italian producer using oak didn't have the same touch and understanding of French people using oak.
Mhm.
So everybody started making incredibly oaky wines. But finally, those they were selling very well.
Hmm. Was there
And
something that happened, like an article or something that?
Robert Parker.
Oh, what year was that?
all the 80s and 90s.
Okay.
Don't you? I think it's the same effect that he had in Napa. And, grandfather never decided to use oak whatsoever.
Mm.
So he did struggle to let people understand what it was trying to do and what it was trying to achieve, but never gave up. So not only he did something different, not only he did something that wasn't really understood back in the days, and there was an element of stubbornness, there was an element of innovation, and there was an element of constance. Because all his life, he never changed his method and never stopped believing into the ideas that he started winemaking with. So gives gives even more power to those ideas because he kept doing the way he wanted it to do year after year after year for 1 decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, 6, 5. So next year we're celebrating our 60th anniversary. And in fact, it's going to be 60 years of vinifying with the same ideas that he started with. So that's pretty strong. And it's also there's a part of freedom because you can take the chance of expressing your vinifying liberty in an area like Abruzzo because there's no much imposition of a structured organization like other region that can be, and allowed grandfather to make his ideas come true. And yeah, not many people know Abruzzo, in fact. But we are located in this region right in the center of Italy, towards the Adriatic coast. We are in the highest point of Abruzzo. So we are at the border of Le Marche. We are at the border of that overlooks the Adriatic Sea. So as you're looking at that picture right now, we are in the highest little point corner that you see. And Abruzzo is a region that has mountains and sea very close to one another. So where we are 10 kilometers from the Adriatic Sea, but on the other side, we are 80 kilometers from the Gran Sasso Mountain, which is the highest mountain of the Apennine chain. And the Apennine chain goes basically from the Alps, which is like right in the north of Italy, and goes down through the boot of Italy to the south. So it is a very specific microclimate. It is very windy because if you can imagine, if you're going from 3,000 meters to sea level in 90 kilometers distance, you have a lot of sea currents, you have a lot of wind currents that are created from the mountains to the sea and backward. And the way it was formed are basically those two plates that were colliding one another and forming the mountains, and the sea little by little retracting. So everything that we are seeing right now outside a window are mainly alluvial formations that were formed through the years, and they have as parental material, as a base, basically the same quartz and the same mother rock of the top of the Gran Sasso as the mountains. And then you have a lot of limestone, and then alluvial stuff that was formed little by little, which is a mix of clay and limestone and sand. All of them in different percentages accordingly to the exposure, accordingly to the inclination of the vineyard. But again, also under that point of view, our researcher with a geologist, Californian actually, but they were the first in the region because there weren't many geological studies being done before in the region related to viticulture. So everything that had been done was related to an attention to choosing the right spot, observing how that whatever was growing there before was performing, and I think it was a challenge in some sense also that.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing that I mean, maybe your grandfather had some wisdom when this property was purchased, or was this property given to him and inherited from previous generations, and he just took with what he had and turned it into something? Which way was it?
Well, funny enough, I'm right now sitting in the house where grandfather was born and where grandfather's grandparents lived most of their lives. So the property was passed on to grandfather by his father. Very little land because they weren't a rich family. And the vineyard in front of the house where we're living, right now, was the first vineyard that grandfather started with. So that only vineyard was passed on to him. And then little by little, he bought land, and he always bought new land because you want to have control over the genetic material that it was planted on top of his decided land. So he bought land, and while buying, he looked at the soil, he looked at exposition, and he looked at sunlight hours, and he looked at wind current and how that vineyard could potentially be healthy, facing mildew, oidium, and all the possible diseases that a vineyard can face.
Sure.
So combination facts.
Very good. And how many total hectare now are in the
So right now we have 17 in production. I've just planted 2.3 of an hectare in 3 different locations in a system of agroforestry and pergola again. So grandfather always loved pergola because it allowed him to shade the grapes from sunlight. And so again, I'm planting in pergola because I think it was already a way to face global warming. But again, now we're looking for even extra shade, and also who knows whatever we'll need to protect ourselves from in the next 20, 30, 40 years. So I'm planting in agroforestry to create even an extra layer of shading on top of our actual pergola. So in a few years, we're gonna have just above 21 hectares. But on top of those vineyard hectares, we have 10 hectares of crop rotation all around our vineyards to increase biodiversity and to grow a lot of things that we eat in within the family, that we serve into our farm to table restaurant, and that we share with our team.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now this is stunning, and so meticulous. And I believe it really looks like your grandfather.
Yes, very, very, very meticulous. This is our aging cellar that grandfather started to fill up in the early 80s. Sorry, one second.
This is a brand that has a library. And when I, as a merchant, get to talk to our sales agent, he has an offering for me that allows me to buy wines from past vintages. And I believe there are a few brands around the world that do this type of thing, but this seller actually recorks older wines and tops them off with bottles of the same vintage, and they stamp the wine with a stamp that says that they recertified the bottle, refilled the bottle, recorked the bottle, because over the cork actually starts to fall apart, and so after a period of time you want to have confidence in the cork and confidence in the wine. So this is an additional step, not a step that anybody else probably in Italy does, right?
Yeah, it's very unique, and it's related to, first of all, grandfather wish and need to age his wines. He always thought that he was, vinifying and making wine for the long-term age, and he thought that long-term age could elevate and add an extra layer of complexity to his wines. And so while, growing and while vinifying, you will always think that those wines could have aged for very, very long time and would need very long time in order to perform the way you wanted them to. For them, for grandfather, the key was really time to let those wines express and to let those wines elevate and to let them really become what they were meant to. And time clearly does a lot to the wine. One of them was clearly let them produce sediment. Grandfather would always let the wine age and filter. It will never bottle, filtering them. So the wine had a lot of matter to support the aging process, but that matter little by little would combine with the acidity and little by little precipitate. That those sediments will nourish the wine in the long term, but also we didn't like for the bottles to travel with a lot of sediment, and that's the reason why he has been doing that process of recorking and reconditioning to make sure that each bottle that we were releasing was actually perfect. And also, as you mentioned in the cork, what happens is that an old cork loses elasticity. And so having a new cork onto an older wine is as giving the wine a second life, because the quality of that second cork is so much better, and the elasticity of the new cork let so much less air filter through. So basically, each bottle that is older than 2001, before it's released, it's reopened and poured into a new fresh bottle. The new fresh bottle is refilled with the second bottle of the same vintage and then corked. And on the cork, but also on the neck label, you read the year of the decantation. So you know exactly when that process happened, and you basically know how long that bottle has spent into our cellar. That's provenance. Because when aging into one only cellar, you know exactly that temperature has always been the same, humidity, light control, nothing has moved. So, clearly plays a big role into the quality of the aging.
We move now into a discussion of the wine itself, Chiara.
Yeah.
And our first wine tonight is a Pecorino.
Yeah.
And has Pecorino always been part of your program?
Well, fairly recent. We have planted the vineyards of Pecorino in between 2006 and 2007. We have 1.5 of an hectare, so teeny tiny production. It's the only of our vineyard that is north facing. The idea when we planted is that Pecorino was a grape varietal that used to be growing up into the mountains. So when we planted here, which we're not really into the mountains because we are 240 meters on sea level, we needed to protect that grape varietal from sunlight, and that's why we planted in north facing. The idea when we started planting Pecorino is that nobody really had ever tried to age Pecorino before. So we were like, well, this grape varietal has a lot of acidity and pretty much a lot of potential, and we love aging, so we should start trying aging it. It is vinified exactly the same way as Trebbiano, so crushed by feet, spontaneous fermentation in concrete. But it goes into completely dimension compared to Trebbiano. Like the viscosity, to me, what plays a huge role in differentiating them, because Pecorino has a totally different mouthfeel, an oiliness and a density that Trebbiano doesn't have. It is an aromatic grape varietal. So clearly it's a much more talkative wine compared to Trebbiano, that normally tends to be more shy and more austere and sharper. Here you have something that is very voluminous and talkative, voluptuous. That all starts in the genetic of the grape varietal, because Pecorino is a very small bunch, very small berries, thicker skin. So as we crush by feet, there is much more, many more solid versus juice. So the extraction, it's more important. The phenolic extraction also plays a role into the results of the wine itself. And since we've started vinifying, we've just been observing its aging and its potential as it ages. So we've been learning, yeah.
We're going to taste this now with our audience, and we'll be right back.
Brilliant.
Probably as important a white as your red. The Trebbiano is part of the story of your house. and a
Yes.
grape variety that I think is really appreciated in the importance, the hierarchy of wine. Certainly, you guys are reminding everyone about this grape variety. Um,
Yeah.
how much Trebbiano do you make?
Well, we make in between 20 and 35,000 bottles of Trebbiano accordingly to the year. Clearly, production shifts quite a bit. We're coming out of a very complicated harvest in which we've made only the 25% of our normal production. So there is quite a shift. Also, especially accordingly to how old vintages decided to perform and the fertility of those ones, especially. The Trebbiano d'Abruzzo for me is a great varietal with an incredible, enormous potential. We verify Trebbiano d'Abruzzo that we then release at the export market. That comes with the Selezione Vecchie Vigne stamp, with grapes coming from a vineyard that is was planted in 1988 with a very specific genetic of Trebbiano abruzzese, which for me plays a huge role in the potential of aging Trebbiano, especially. Because the genetic plays a huge role in within the acidity that it delivers, in within the quality of skins that they have, and the extraction, that little extraction that it's played at that time, and the length and the potential of aging that comes out of that. So to me, there is a big role related to that. And yes, indeed, it's so underestimated, but what time has proved right now that you can taste not only our Trebbiano, but many Trebbianos now in Abruzzo, or not many, but a few with 20, 30 years on it, and it performs incredibly well.
As we will, when we taste this wine, we need to appreciate the natural methods that you're using, the natural, as you call it, spontaneous fermentation, all indigenous yeasts, the foot treading, skin contact a little bit as well, right?
Well, there's no maceration in within the fermentation. The skin stimulation only happens in the food treading process that only lasts about 45 minutes.
Okay. And so would you consider the winemaking process slightly oxidative or pretty
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So the juice, yeah, there's no protection there's no protection at the very early stage. Let's say this.
And when you're making both these white wines, are you adding sulfur in small amounts at bottling?
We're not dogmatic around it, so yes, we are adding on the mash, and we are adding on the before bottling, never too close to bottling, but we're adding small amounts, and those amounts, they vary accordingly to the quality of the grapes that we're receiving, and how normally the wine has performed in tank. So they're fairly small amounts, but yes, we do add.
Very good. And obviously that's to prevent spoilage and to preserve the wine over a long period of time. And sulfur is
Yeah.
naturally occurring, and it is considered part of the natural winemaking process.
Well, to me, there's many aspects into which sulfur plays a role, which is preserving the quality of the matter at the very first beginning, and then preserving the process, because you don't want any acceleration of the aging process whatsoever. So I'm trying to go in bottle with something that is still very energetic, that is still on the reductive side. And all those elements, yes, are played through winemaking techniques, but also with the help of sulfur when regulated in a very precise way. So I'm trying to use never too much that what I need, but the minimum amount, and I never want the wine in lack of that.
Are you using stainless or concrete?
Exclusively concrete for ferment and aging. I do have some stainless steel that I only use when I need extra capacity, because I'm vinifying in a very old cellar that grandfather built in the early 80s. So you can imagine I don't have all the comforts of a modern cellar.
We'll taste the Trebbiano and be right back.
Brilliant.
Chiara, Montepulciano is
Yeah.
the variety, and this is a grape variety that I think maybe you could explain a little bit to us.
Absolutely. Well, Montepulciano is definitely, the great varietal Abruzzo is known for. The great varietal that we've mainly have cultivated here at Pepe. The way grandfather decided to do back in the days is to have his own muscle selection that he reproduced. So we have a mix of genetics of Montepulciano that we replicate and reproduce every time we replant. So the way Montepulciano behaves is that it's very important the last part of the ripening cycle, and to have that in the cold, it's even better. Montepulciano normally tends to have this beautiful velvety skin that grandfather will always say it's always better when it ripens in the shade, because that velvet doesn't get touched by the sun directly, so you can preserve that sensation that it's a pretty much it's a touch sensation when you can touch the berry, but it's the same sensation in your mouth when you taste the wine that has been vinified with delicacy and tenderness. We think a lot about texture and about this velvety sensation while vinifying. So our extractions are always played in a very delicate attitude all the way through. So we care about photosynthesis, we care about berries and that protection from the sun, and then we care about extraction, and then we care about aging and not extracting extra tannins. And that's the reason why we do not use oak, and the reason why we only use concrete lined with glass, and then all the aging happens in bottle. So you never see any oak in our cellar whatsoever. And the idea is to protect the quality of tannins, to protect the pristine sensation of the mouthfeel, and the combination of elements, which is in between, the polyphenolic and the acidity and the density and the matter and the structure. Grandfather always been very delicate with extraction. That's something that we've been trying to preserve and continue in his way of doing. And for it's for us a little bit the key of an elegance, but also of an aging potential that is very related to the Pepe style in some sense.
100%. I love the description you provided about the outer velvety.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how many grape varieties in the world actually kind of have that characteristic. I think it's pretty unique.
Um. Uh. Good question. Good question, Ian. I would say so. Like they all behave in a very different way, and clearly this is the one that we are most familiar with. I've To me, it's like when you get very close to a grape varietal, you really know all the in and out, and this is for sure our key of interpretation to Montepulciano that we've been, learning and studying and observing since few years now.
Well, I was treated to some amazing older vintages when you were in town, and they really are remarkable wines, and each bottle is a different story and collection of information, and it's really phenomenal to be able to hear you discuss it and see the passion of your grandfather kind of you're exuding that wisdom, and it's just beautiful to be able to talk to you and to share this with our group here. I really hope that we can cross paths again and again, and I'm just very, very honored to be able to spend this time with you, and
Thank
good luck to you in this coming vintage.
you. Grazie mille.
And I hope you have a great holiday
You
and
too.
your
You
health.
all.
Thanks for persevering, even though you're not feeling 100%. You are still a remarkable host.
Amazing. Well, thanks. Thanks so much for having me. It's always I love every opportunity of talking about the family and the wines, and this is what we do in the vineyard and in the cellar on a daily basis. So it's lovely to be, to be able to talk and explain more and explain deeper. So I love every opportunity that I have to go through and explain it all. And so thank you. Enjoy your holidays, and enjoy the tastings that you have coming up.
Thank you so much. We'll share
Grazie.
it for years to come.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Chiara.
Thank you,
Ciao.
Ian. Ciao,
Bye.
ciao.